This is Gabriela on the scene today with Talk Network Radio. We have a real treat for you just around the corner, and that is Empowered Living with Jeff Byrd. Jeff is the owner of Jeffrey Byrd Coaching, and he will be coming to you weekly to teach you more about empowered living. Now, let's join Jeff already in the studio.
Hello and welcome. This is Jeff Byrd of Jeffrey Byrd Coaching, and this is Empowered Living. Now, today we have a very special treat for you. My longest standing friend, a friend whom, believe it or not, I met when I was 4 years old in kindergarten, is going to be on the show with us today. Her name is Barbara Valentine Gustafson. And Barbara, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Jeff. Oh, my goodness. Can you believe it? It's been, since kindergarten. I remember the playground, class, and it's pretty crazy, isn't it?
It is absolutely crazy. And who would have known, it just goes to show there just are no coincidences. Everything is purposeful, and it may take several decades to realize what the purpose was, but we never dreamed we would have both had our own coaching businesses. And you actually introduced me 4 years ago to the John Maxwell team and helped me get started. And here we are today on this podcast that I now have. And we are now introducing the book that you just published. I just got my copy in the mail this week called Permission to Be Bold. So congratulations. And I can't wait to dig in here and read this.
Thanks, Jeff. I appreciate it. And glad your book arrived. I mentioned earlier, my books have not even arrived yet. So the author books take quite a bit longer. So I'm thrilled you got yours before mine.
It's amazing how that works. Amazon definitely has their act together. Yeah. And you'll be able to see that link for those of you who are watching this live on Facebook. You'll be able to see the link to the book as we go through the show here. But here it is. I've got my copy in the studio, and it's called Permission to Be Bold, a guide to loving yourself, living fully, and leaving your mark on the world. What 3 fabulous topics. And Barbara, what I really want to do is I want to hear your story. I want to hear more about this. I know some of your story, but I'm looking very, very forward to hearing more and introducing your journey here that led to the book, that led to the coaching practice, to our listeners and our viewers here today. So I want to ask you, first question I have is, why bold? What does that mean to you? And what has been your journey that led to this book?
Yeah, it's been quite a journey. And for those who like the bottom line up front, the reason why I wrote this book is I want to help people define what bold living is to them. Boldness, happiness, success, those are such general terms that we use. And until we get really specific on what that means for us, not with the next person, we generally go into this default state, look to live boldly or happy or, joyful or successful. But what is bold living for you? And what is it for the season that we're in? Because we go through lots of changes, right? And so that's kind of the bottom line up front. But when I look back on my childhood, I was anything but bold. In fact, I hid behind my mom, and I had so many fears that began at an early age. I had a lot of childhood trauma that was solidified, I would say, by the early elementary years and at home. And I became this wallflower mainly as a form of self-protection. I was really pleasing my teachers, my parents, my friends, and I didn't know who I was, and I didn't know how to be myself, because so the easiest thing for me to do was not stand out, just behind the scenes. And it really solidified this view I had of how the world existed, but also my view of myself, my view of God, life in general. And so I lived through those filters for several decades, up until about 7 years ago. So the interesting thing, though, is even though I had this, life of hiding, I felt God whispering to me so many years to live boldly. And it's ironic that it was a whisper and not like a boom, hit on the head by a 2x4. It was a gentle whisper, go forth, live boldly. And it always confused me because it was such an opposite of what I had been living. I didn't know how to do it. I didn't know how to be bold. And my view of bold was, very different than I do it now. And so for many, several, I would say about close to 30 years, instead of stepping into that, I ran, I hid. And we hear of how fear affects us, the fight, flight, or, freeze type thing. I tended to freeze or just completely implode and withdraw. And so lots of times people didn't have any idea what was going inside me. I was very good at putting a smile on my face, acting like everything was okay. I was a very nice person, pleased people. And so no one really had a clue. And honestly, I didn't understand what was going on inside. So I had a hard time stating what my needs were. So my coping, and I think we get really good at coping anytime we're trying to mask or hide the fear or push down our pain. And my form of hiding often was getting busy. I would even hide behind roles as a mother, as a wife, as a worker in the corporate world. I would hide behind my work just so I wouldn't have to deal with my pain or just the discomfort of standing out. And so I had these patterns that I would live in unintentionally, but it was easier for me to do anything else. Does that make sense to you?
That does. I like that. And, so often, I was thinking to myself prior to our show today, when I think about bold, what does that, what image does that conjure in my mind? And I think of very scary things, or at least they're scary to me, like jumping off a cliff in a windsuit, or rappelling, or like the opening scene in Mission Impossible 2, where he's like climbing barehanded up rock faces, and it makes my hands sweat just talking about it. But what you're talking about is something not like that, not doing something that's totally not you, but it was almost, it sounds like to me, the boldness was actually having the courage to really be you. If that was exercising a true strength or gift that you had that was just being underutilized or not utilized because of a fear, or a fear of just opening up and saying, hey, this is really where I am. It's not what you see. It's not what I want to be, but this is kind of where I am. So for you, how would you really narrow down and define what that, if you were to put a definition on personal boldness for you, what would that be?
Well, I'm so glad you brought that up because it was really a process of discovering and exploring what is bold and what is it for me. And interestingly enough, if you go to different dictionary resources, some of the first words that you see are exactly what you just described, Jeff. Doing big, grandiose, fast and furious, daring things, these big achievements, things that really externally stand out in. And I realized that's really what the world view of bold is, and that's what I believed it was too. And it can be. But on some of those words, if you scroll down, it's more subtle, but you'll also see some other words that don't quite stand out as much. It's things like having courage. I think you mentioned that. Also, having imagination, stretching yourself. And so I realized a lot of bold comes from inside. It's internal. It's about thinking different. It's about developing thought patterns. It's about creating our lives, with our imagination. And for me, that was a paradigm shift because I realized my goal was more inner transformation. Eventually it'll get to the outer, external results. But I had been so focused on the outward steps, I had been stepping a little bit too bigly and big. And what I realized was I was experiencing resistance. I wasn't quite ready for those big steps yet. And so it was important for me to lay a foundation of inner transformation. And so some of the things that I found that were bold for me, and these are things that people don't see when you make a choice to do these, setting clear boundaries, creating healthy boundaries with ourselves, the people around us, things like learning to say no. Typically we say yes because we feel obligated versus really want to do that thing.
Right.
And I was caught up in that, in the energy of that, thinking I had to say yes because I had to always be available to people and help people. But I realized that just brings, that puts me in a position where I start to have unhealthy patterns and I build up resentment. And so a mentor, ours, Paul Martinelli, says, nothing good grows from the soil of application. And that just really struck a chord with me because I realized by my own choice, I had resentment built up because I would say yes to obligations. So learning to say no and become more assertive was a very uncomfortable but a very bold internal step for me. Being myself. That was huge because honestly, I didn't know who I was. So allowing myself to explore and get to know myself, focus on who I'm becoming, that was a huge breakthrough for me. Discovering what my strengths were, my purpose. So all of these, and then some, I realized were what my bold is. And there's times where I make some bold external steps, but if I only focus on the outward, I find it's very fleeting. It doesn't have that purpose and meaning for me.
Amen. It just doesn't have the impact. And I love that quote, and I want to just state it again in case somebody might have been writing it down from Paul Martinelli. Is it nothing good grows from the soil of obligation?
Got it. That's it.
Wow. How freeing to only pick up and run with those things that you feel resonating within you and not being imposed from the outside. Wow. I love that. But, I want to ask you about something that you and I have chatted about this a little bit in the past. And what I want to ask you about relates to what you were mentioning. You mentioned it a couple of times here on the inner world. And it reminds me, and I just read it this morning. It just popped up randomly. I didn't intend to read it, but it was in the Gospel of Luke, and it's a story of the talents and people using their talents and using the gifts they've been given. And there's a couple of them who do really well. They invest themselves. They take what they've been given and they make more. And then there's one guy that doesn't. But the reason that he doesn't is because of what he's believing or not on the inside. And I wondered, I know that this parable has had some significant meaning to you personally. Could you share just a little bit about what that parable means to you and about the inner beliefs that were hindering you before you actually kind of broke free and started really using your gifts, which we're all so glad you are?
Oh, yeah. Thank you. This particular story from the Bible has such great meaning because there's, like you said, there's the ones that invested in their talents. And of course, we're talking about money in the Bible, but I literally think of it as my talent because that just struck a chord with me. So I was the guy who had my talents buried for years. And what I find interesting, he intentionally buried his talents, like dug a hole, buried the money, whatever. And so I think there's sometimes we intentionally not do anything with our talents. We know what they are, but there's also this